Hey, welcome back to Deck Check, where you better check yourself before you deck yourself. So today we're going to be looking at the 1K at GalaxyCon OKC, taking a quick look at the meta as well as the top 16 breakdown, and I've got some charts and stuff I would like to show y'all. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. Here you can see the tournament entries at the event. We had 8 blue farms, we had 5 Sisays, 5 Kenriths, and then a smattering of other decks. We had a couple each of Thrasios, a couple Kinnans, a couple Italis, a couple Rogsais. And then we can take a look over here at the top 16 breakdown in comparison. And you can kind of see here we had 5 blue farms that made it into the top 16, 3 Sisays, and then 1 each of all these other decks. As Kenrith, there's a Kodama, there is a Tivit, some a Rogsai, and TNT. But yeah, it looks like the majority of the meta here was Sisay and Blue Farm. And then lastly, I have a chart for the conversion rate. Now definitely take this with a grain of salt, because as you can see, some of these have 100% conversion rate, and that's because there was like 1 or 2 decks that actually entered the tournament and just made top 16. For example, there was 1 Rog Thrasios, and that just made top 16, so that's going to have 100%. So why don't we take a look at some of these other decks? For example, here, so Sisay, we can see that half of all the Sisay decks that entered this event just made top 16, which is a pretty high percentage. And 60% of all the blue farm decks that entered the tournament made it. Myself, of course, being one of them. Now, granted, this was a smaller tournament, so some of these numbers might be a little bit skewed, but you can kind of take this as a general idea of how well these decks are performing. Sisay and Blue Farm both performed very well here. And with that, let's take a look at the deck lists coming up next. And a quick reminder, if you like this sort of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It actually does help the channel a lot. Thank you. Alright, like always, we are going to start with number 16, and we are going to move backwards all the way up to number 1. So we're starting off with Combat Go Burr, and I will have the links to the bracket so you can see all the players that were on each one. So this is going to be Timna Crom, Blue Farm, and this looks very standard so far. It looks fairly similar to the list that I'm running. I'm trying to see if I can find any differences here. Oh, this person is on Wheel of Fortune and Dispel. I am not on those specific cards. They're also on Snap. But aside from that, oh, and they're also on Mox Ember and the One Ring. They're not on Necropotence, and I am. But aside from that, and the Dress Down, of course. Oh, wow, okay, so interesting. They're actually also on Minamo, so this synergizes only with the One Ring in this deck. So a bit interesting. We are on the Otawara. We are on the standard Blue Farm suite. We're also on another Shockland here with Hallowed Fountain. But overall, fairly stock, I would say. There's not too much crazy to talk about here. My own list isn't too different from this one either. So, next up, we have another Kinnan here. So, another Kinnan deck, it looks like. Also looks fairly standard for Kinnan. We do have the Ballista, which is a little bit different. And then also we have Dosan the Falling Leaf, so this is basically just a silence. Makes sense. You don't want people casting stuff on your turns. You can't flip into this, but it's only 3 mana, so it's really not too bad to cast. It's also running this new card, Forensic Gadgeteer. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you investigate, and activated abilities of artifacts you control cost 1 less to activate, and it can't reduce that cost less than 1 mana. So basically, whenever you cast a artifact, you will investigate, and it's only going to cost you 1 mana to crack this clue, which is super good. And for those that don't know, Kinnan is a deck that revolves around controlling the board, making a bunch of mana, and then activating Kinnan's activated ability, where you pay 7 and then you just put a creature onto the board, and they're hoping for a very back-breaking creature like Void Winnower that's going to stop your opponents from casting their spells, or Consecrated Sphinx, drawing a bunch of cards. I'm sure most of you that have played against a Kinnan know exactly what's going on here, so I won't go on too long about it. But there is another card here that we haven't seen, which is the Pride of Hull Clay. This is a pretty interesting card. It's an 11 CMC, and it costs X less to cast, or X is the total toughness of creatures you control. Kind of weird. And then you can pay 4 mana, and until end of turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0. And it has, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its toughness, and it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. So what they're trying to do here is flip into it, activate the ability, give it +1/+0, and draw 15 cards. It also has Defender. One of the downsides of this card, though, is if anyone has like a chump blocker or something, this is not going to do that much. Like if the board state's kind of gummed up, of course someone's going to block to stop you from drawing 15 cards. But if you can get this out early before players really have their defenses up, it can be pretty good. Aside from that, I didn't see too much that was non-standard from most Kinnan lists. They are on the Staxier version of Kinnan. They are on the Trinisphere. They are on the Soul Cauldron, because of course we have Ballista. And then they're also on Freed from the Real, which is a little bit interesting. I don't know, it seems like this deck is a little bit split between the stacks idea and the combo idea. But yeah, aside from that, this is fairly standard. Got the Mirage Mirror 2 as a infinite mana outlet as well. And not too much else to go around here. Next up, we have Timna Kodama. I played against this specific deck. Unfortunately, the one game that I played against this player, he had a turn skip and probably couldn't do as much as he was wanting to. But it was a fun game nonetheless. So the way this deck kind of works is you have Timna as your draw engine, of course, and then you have Kodama, who enables some basically uncounterable combos. He has, whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. So we'll go through the deck list a little bit, and I'll show off exactly how this deck kind of works. We've got the battle here for creature tutor. We've got Vivian here, which is another creature tutor, and there is a combo with this, I believe. Let me check to see if they are running it. Yeah, there's some sort of combo with it. We'll take a look in a sec. But yeah, so this deck is going to be running a bunch of Minidorks. We have the Esper Sentinel for card draw, got Lotho for mana. We've got I can't pronounce this, Acerak, the Archlich. Yeah, so this is going to combo with Kodama of the East Tree. So you put this down, and you're going to basically choose a dungeon that is not Tomb of Annihilation, and then Kodama's going to trigger, and it's going to say if it wasn't put by the ability, then you may put a permanent with equal or lesser mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. And you can, I don't think this actually goes infinite, but you can do some fun stuff with it. It's just kind of like value. I'll see if later on in the deck list there is something else that allows Akarak to go infinite, but I'm not seeing it right here, because if you put it down, Kodama will trigger, you bounce your Akarak, and then you can put it down again, but from there it'll kind of stop. So anyway, I got the Charismatic Conqueror. Someone else played this card against me in the tournament. It was kind of interesting. I did make a lot of 1/1 white vampire creatures with lifelink, so this card can get out of control kind of quickly. Gotta watch out for it. And aside from that, this is a stacks list overall. We're on the Archon of Emeria. We're on Boromir to shut off those pesky free spells. Going to shut off Force of Will and Lion's Eye Diamond, Chromox, all the good free mana rocks. Got a Cutzel to Grand Abolisher us, and we're running like actual Grand Abolisher as well. So as Ranger Captain, all the white staples are going to be in here. Dauntless, Draenith, Dothy, all the Staxy creatures. And then we have Restoration Angel and Karmic Guide, which I'm sure have some sort of combo in here. Felidar Guardian. Yeah, I think this combos with Vivian. So yeah, very cool list overall. We're on some heavier creatures too, with Elish Norn, which you don't see in a lot of decks, but I mean, it's very, very impactful. Thankfully, they didn't get this out against me, or it would have been pretty rough, but yeah. Aside from that, it's running some interesting cards in the interaction suite. We have Silence, but we also are on Angel's Grace, which is just kind of interesting. Because I feel like there might be other things you could do in that slot, but it makes sense. This is just going to stop Thoracles, basically. I can't really think of anything else that really stops, because with Breach, you can just play through it. Yeah, so we're also on Birthing Pod, and yeah, this is kind of why we're on some of these other cards. We can chain up to a win. And yeah, there's not too much to say about it. I don't know exactly what the line is. So if you do know, just let me know in the comments. But yeah, this does some sort of weird thing where they eventually just win the game. So yeah. Anyway, next up we have Sisay with GalaxyCon. That's just what the deck is called. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with how Sisay works. But for those that are not, basically you get out Sisay, you want to spin her until you assemble a chain of legendaries. Now usually this will be enabled by something like Bloomtender or Dockside Extortionist. Those are two of some of the most, or Silvala. Those are three of the most important cards in the deck, because they allow you to spin Sisay, untap it, go get another spin. Derevi also helps with this too, and untapping Bloomtender, and eventually you will chain out and win the game with some combination of Nicol Bolas, Amanatu flickering your stuff, and Oath of Teferi, which, let's see if this deck is on, and yep, it's on Oath of Teferi. This card will let you infinitely blink your stuff and just kind of win the game. There were some interesting cards in here that aren't super standard. For one, there's a Dahada, and I don't think I've seen Dahada too much before in Sisay's. But it does make sense, because it will immediately just make you the 4 treasures and you can flicker it. This could be core now, I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, so also this deck has Canine Mark 1. So this is kind of interesting. I haven't seen this in any Sisay decks so far, but it's going to give you all of your legendary creatures Ward 1, and you can pay 2 and tap it and give your legendary creature unblockable, which can be relevant, because if you have like a Sisay out and you want to give her that Exalted trigger with Ignoble or Noble Hierarch, you can make her unblockable, and then you know she's not going to die at the least. So aside from that, this deck is on some other kind of weird cards that I haven't seen in a lot of Sisay lists. Sig River Cutthroat. Beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you can draw a card. Yeah, I mean, we are losing life all the time in cEDH, and this deck can just whack you with Sisay to guarantee that card draw. Another card is Colossal Sky Turtle. Channel abilities are just very good in general, and it kind of makes sense why you want this card overall. This doesn't see a ton of cEDH play. I think it is in some Kinnan lists, but the uncounterable like kind of nature of it, getting through Grand Abolisher, makes this card just pretty good overall. Aside from that, fairly standard interaction suite. Nothing too crazy here. And the artifacts as well is fairly standard. Of course, we're on the One Ring and Wishclaw Talisman. And yeah, everything else fairly standard. A lot of the staples. We've got Oath of Nissa to be the kind of 1-mana legendary that replaces itself. That's just a pretty good rate overall. And we've got a very standard 5-color mana base. So nothing too crazy going on here. Next up, we have a deck that is 404'd. This was a blue farm list, so we're not missing out too much here. But yeah, this list is gone. And after that, we have Tivit. So this Tivit list was kind of interesting. This is also running the Forensic Gadgeteer. We're seeing this pop up in more and more lists overall. I haven't tested it out myself, but you know, who knows? Maybe it's worth a slot in Blue Farm. Although we don't cast a crazy number of artifacts. We do run quite a few, but I don't know if Artifact Storm is exactly what we're trying to go with here. But yeah, maybe worth a shot. Maybe check this card out. So for those that haven't played against Tivit, this deck is gonna try to outvalue players with clues and also going to try to get out a time sieve. And this goes for infinite combats with Tivit if you get out a time sieve. This deck's also on Mirkwood Bats, and that's a really weird addition I have not seen in almost any deck. It's going to be a life loss kind of card, so it's going to trigger... Wow, actually, I guess each token you get off of Tivit is going to cost... it's going to cost them 2 life. So, I mean, that's honestly not a terrible rate. So if you get... When Tivit ETBs, if you have this out and you're able to sacrifice all your tokens, each opponent is actually going to lose a total of 5 times 2. So, wow, actually, that is a lot of life. That's 10 life. Okay, I kind of see why this card could be good in this list. I mean, it isn't super proactive, but taxing them out that much is definitely significant. And we're also on Abdul Adrian. This, I believe, is because it is an infinite. So let's go ahead and check the enchantments and correct. So this is going to go infinite with Animate Dead. If you animate Abdul Adrian, you can exile any number of non-land permanents you control until it leaves the battlefield, and you make a 1/1 for each one. So it's kind of like World Gorger. You're going to bring in Animate Dead, attach to Abdul. He'll trigger, he'll exile the Animate Dead, which will cause him to leave the battlefield, and then when he leaves, all of your stuff that you're exiling will come back, including Animate Dead, and then he will just keep triggering again until you will make infinite 1/1 White Soldier tokens, and if you have mana rocks, you will also create infinite mana. And also with Tivit, you can also exile Tivit, and this will go infinite. You'll make infinite clues, infinite treasures, and from there you can do whatever you want to win the game. This deck's also on Deadeye Navigator, which is a bit of a slower card. I haven't seen this in a lot of Tivits, but I mean, it kind of makes sense because this also goes infinite with Tivit in that you can make infinite clues specifically, because you can vote treasure twice, and then your opponents usually are just going to vote clues. But infinite clues is just not a bad thing. Yeah, this card overall will generate you a lot of value in the late game. And of course, we're on the Hullbreaker Horror, which will also kind of just go infinite. And Tivit kind of serves as an infinite outlet for that as well, because once you get infinite mana, you can cast out Tivit and start flickering Tivit and then draw through your deck. Aside from that, this is, again, a fairly standard-ish Tivit list. We do have some weird cards, though, that I haven't seen before in Tivit, like this Entomb. There's a Power Sink, which I have not seen in cEDH ever. Counter target spell unless its caster pays an additional X. If they don't, you tap all mana producing lands they control and remove all mana from their mana pool. So this is just kind of interesting cards. It's a counter spell, and if they can't pay, you force them to pay. So kind of interesting. This doesn't hit mana rocks, so maybe not the best idea, but this does hit every spell, so it also will hit stuff like Dockside, so maybe it's worth testing out. Also, this deck is on straight up just counterspell, which is interesting, and then we are also on Mana Drain, of course, and then Negate. I'm kind of wondering if maybe some of these cards are in here for like budget reasons, over like strictly like what is optimal, which is totally cool. Like these are good additions for a budget deck, and it certainly performed well because it made top 16. So yeah. And then it's also in the Stroke of Midnight, which is kind of a universal non-land permanent removal. For 3 mana is a bit steep. I think I would probably rather play Get Lost instead of this. But, you know, it's not bad. Not terrible. Yeah, this deck looks a lot more combo focused than any other Tivit deck I've seen. Usually the Tivit decks are more focused on control. But this one's on like Altar of the Brood as a Infinite Outlet to Abdel Adrian. It is on Abdel Adrian and Animate Dead itself, which most decks are not on. So yeah, kind of an interesting list overall. Oh yes, okay, I remember this player. Yeah, he was also on Dromar's Cavern. And it was this. I was in a game with him, and this land actually hurt him quite a bit because he was struggling on land drops, and he played a Remora out, and then this was the land he drew, so he played it, and he had to bounce another land, which was extremely rough. Yeah, I would say maybe take out this one, but overall pretty cool list. Next up, we have another Sisay. There's not too much different about this except to say that it's on Lurrus and Thoracle, whereas the other deck I don't think was on Lurrus and was not on Thoracle, and they are on Tainted Pact along with Thoracle, which kind of makes sense. Yeah, this deck is putting in a lot of just win cons in it. It's kind of like win cons.deck because it's on Thoracle. It's also on Underworld Breach. It's on Cultist of the Absolute, so they can boost Sisay's power and just try to win quickly. And it's also on Flicker to, I guess, Flicker Dockside. I think that's like basically just the main reason. I would probably rather run Snap instead of that. Oh, this also hits Dahada. That's right. Okay, so this can this works with Dahada and Underworld Breach to also win the game because Dahada will mill you and you can keep flickering her and making treasures and things. So actually, this does make sense. All right. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, fairly standard. Besides that. Next up is Noiseless Blue Farm. I don't know that I personally would run Noiseless version of Blue Farm. This is a very off meta list as far as Blue Farm goes. They are on Sidisi's Faithful, and I believe there is actually and a sort of weird infinite with Delny. It doesn't look like they are on Delny though, so we don't really need to talk about that. The reason decks play this card is because it bounces your own dockside. It can act as removal in general, and also it is fetchable off of Ranger Captain as a third target. So instead of just Esper Sentinel on Ragavan, you can also get this card now. It's also on Tishana's Tidebinder. And you're seeing some of these like higher CMC cards because they're not on Nas and they don't care that Talion is 4 mana and Tishana's is 3 and Facebreaker is 3. Like it doesn't seem to really bother them. They're on some interesting hate pieces like Containment Priest, which I've been off and on that card. It has been pretty impactful against Sisay and Kinnan, but the problem is they can kind of just kill it, which sucks. I do like the Time Bender though. That is pretty interesting. I'll keep those Sisays down and stuff, but it'll only do it until they kill it, which kind of sucks. Aside from that, semi-standard-ish for Blue Farm. We're on 2 wheels. I am on no wheels, but I might be in the minority on that. They're on Betrayal and Praetor's Grasp, which is kind of a lot of win cons for this deck. I don't really feel like you need that many. But, you know, if it's working for them, by all means. They're on a good amount of instants. They're on 27, which is kind of a lot, I feel like. They're on Alchemist Retrieval, which I'm not on, but it's just a good card overall because you can pay 1 mana, bounce your dockside, and use it as a ritual. And they're also on Return the Favor, which I thought was pretty interesting. This card is actually good. The downside to it is that it's double red and 1, so it's a 3 mana card. But it is really strong, just overall. Like, it might even be worth testing in blue form. I don't know if it is, but we can try it out. You can copy dockside ETBs. You can copy anything. You can copy any spell or ability besides a mana ability in the game, which is just really cool. So if like someone goes like an ad Nas or something, you can copy it and add Nas before them, maybe counter their Nas. Stuff like that. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting list. If you want to try blue farm, but you want to be kind of quirky with it, try it out. Try out this list. They're on some interesting cards. Imposter Mech's one of them. They're on the One Ring. The enchantment suite is fairly standard here, and they're also on Minamo to support the ring. So yeah, I don't know. If you want to be a little bit different with your blue farm, you can try this. They're also on the Teferi for the additional silence. Yeah, I don't know if I'd play it quite like this, but yeah, it's kind of cool. Next up, we have Kenrith. This is Comedian's Kenrith. I'm not going to go too deep into this because I'm sure he will have his own video and I don't want to steal his thunder. But yeah, let's go over it really quick. This deck is going to revolve around activating Kenrith's activated abilities, maybe generating a bunch of mana with Culling Ritual, and then it finishes out the game by, like, there's Emil Dockside here. There is Atali, which is just really fun overall. Agatha is an unbelievably powerful card in Kenrith, because you can put +1/+1 counters on her, and you can reduce all of his abilities eventually to just 1 mana. And paying just 1 mana, draw a card, or reanimate something is kind of absurd. So this card's been popping up more and more on Kenrith lists. He's also on the Mayhem Devil, and he's on the Displacer Kitten lines. Yeah, so overall, I think more Kenrith decks more and more are starting to look like this. He is on Sylvan Library, which I'm not sure how many Kenrith decks are on that one, and he's also on Survival of the Fittest, which definitely makes sense because this is way more creature focused. His interaction suite is actually really interesting. So he's on Spell Snare, which makes perfect sense because some of the best cards in the format are 2 mana. He's on the Eldami's Call, usually for Dockside. I did not actually see a sack outlet, and I could be wrong. But yeah, I don't see that there is a sack outlet here, but there is the Phantasmal Image, and there is a way to target it and reanimate it and have a copy of Dockside and just go infinite that way. But yeah, I won't go too crazy and deep. I'm sure he'll have a video about this at some point, so maybe check that one out. Alright, so next up we have, and I'm quoting here, RT Turbo Bad Farm, which is Timnarog. Kind of weird. You don't really see this partner pairing often, but this is going to be like a Mardu deck. And it's just kind of interesting. Like, they have Dark Confident as a draw engine. It's kind of cool. Like, you could run this. It's a Timna attacker, and it's going to guarantee draw you that card. Downside to this is the life loss and revealing what card it is. So I don't know that I would play it particularly, but it's an okay option. And there's Leonin Relic Warder. I'm guessing this goes infinite with something. Yeah, so Animate Dead, it's going to exile that and come back and try to go infinite that way. It's also an Abdul Adrian, which we've talked about before. Same idea there. Running a lot of like good Timna attackers. We're on Delny, we're on Boromir, we're on Mayhem Devil. Grim Hireling is going to make us a bunch of treasures, and Sheoldred's going to hit on our opponent's draws, so that definitely makes a lot of sense. This is like kind of in the middle between turbo and mid-range. I feel like I don't really know that this is the turbo-est of decks, but it's pretty close. Like, it's on Culling the Weak, it's on Cabal Ritual, it's on Ad Nauseam, but it's also on stuff like Deadly Rollick. And yeah, just an interesting deck overall. Yeah, I feel like this is almost as turbo as you can go without being literally Rogsai, or, you know, maybe it is. Maybe it is even a little faster. So we're on the Springleaf Drum. We're having Rog to enable our turbo mana, and our Timna to guarantee those draws. A little bit like Rogsai, but you're playing Timna instead of Silas. So yeah, very cool deck. Recommend checking this one out. Next up is Rog Thrasios. So this is another kind of turbo deck. You're going to see like a lot of fast mana in here that Rog enables. There's some interesting cards in this one. Of course, Rog Thrasios is going to love that Seedborn Muse. It's on some interesting cards overall, like this Druid of Purification. It's on this Baron, which combos with Dockside to go infinite. This Cloud of Fairies goes infinite with something, I'm sure. And then it's also on Emrakul, which you don't see too often. So it kind of feels like this deck's plan is to make a lot of mana and then power out one of these like impactful creatures: Consecrated Sphinx, Atali, Hullbreaker Horror, Emrakul, Nyx Bloom, or maybe try to flip into it with Kinnan. But this deck's actually really interesting. So they're on Meltdown, which I guess hurts them less than it does other decks, even though they're on a lot of artifacts. And it looks like a lot of this deck is creature focused. So we have our Natural Order, which is going to suck one of these big boys and draw us a bunch of cards. We're on Bring to Light, which is going to serve as a tutor. I'm guessing usually this is going to be Seedborn Muse, if we can try it. Might be hard to get those 5 colors, so maybe this is just a second copy of Dockside. Yeah, this is just a cool deck overall. We're on the Cursed Mirror. I'm not 100% sure why we're on Thorn of Amethyst. This might be just to protect our combo turn, where we are comboing out and with our Cloudstone Curio or something and like Dockside, and we don't really care if our non-creature spell costs 1 more, because we'll have a little bit more mana than everyone else on our turn. And aside from that, this deck is kind of weird on ramp. It's running a lot of it, and I feel like this is definitely also more turbo slanted. We're also on Song of Creation, which I thought was cool. And that'll allow us to kind of storm through and win the game. So this deck isn't quite as fast as the Timna Rog we just saw. But it also does seem a bit more Dockside and Seedborn focused than the other one was, whereas the one we saw before was a little bit more focused on Rograk and sacrificing him and stuff like that. So it's a pretty cool deck. Definitely check it out. It will be linked in the description along with everything else. And next up, we have another blue farm. I don't see anything here too crazy. This is pretty similar to my list as well, except I'm not on Delny, and I'm not on Wheel here. But yeah, let's see what else is different. This all looks fairly standard. He's on Path as well. I'm only on Swords, but he's on Path and Swords. Artifact Suite looks fairly standard. I don't see anything that stands out too much. And we are on Necropotence as well, which has become quite popular recently in the Blue Farm world. Next up is another Sisay. This one is my friend's list. He was in the top 4 with me, and we split. Fairly standard. Again, we see the Colossal Sky Turtle. And I don't think there's too much to say about this one that we haven't seen with the other Sisay. But good job making it to top 4 for sure. He was on Touch the Spirit Realm, which the other one wasn't. Just a good way to get rid of Grand Abolisher, basically, or other cards. And we're also on Blind Obedience here, which is just a good stack card. Next up is Blue Farmer. This is Blue, which is kind of my mentor in cEDH. And my list actually originated as his list. And you can probably see quite a few similarities. And I changed mine a lot more over time, whereas his has stayed mostly the same. You can kind of see if you compare mine and his, how it kind of evolved. He is on Angel's Grace, which I don't personally really agree with, but works for him, so cool. And fairly standard overall. We are on the wheel. I am not. We're on these artifacts. We're also on the One Ring and Smothering Tithe. I am not on One Ring, but aside from that, looks fairly standard Blue Farm. Next up, we have TNT. I know this player as well. This deck has Devoted Druid lines. It's going to have this double card draw on the command zone with Kinnan and Thrasios. It's got Emil, and that's going to kind of go infinite with Derevi if you have a Gaia's Cradle or some other like absurdly mana producing thing. Like I don't think they are on Bloom Tender. So I think maybe it is just Derevi. Let me see if I can find anything else. Or maybe if the Metamorph copies the Dockside, actually, that can be pretty good, or the Flesh Duplicate. But yeah, so this Devoted Druid is going to go infinite with Machine God's Effigy, and from there you can kind of just pump it all into Thrasios and win the game, because you can have Machine God's Effigy come in as a Devoted Druid and then put a -1/-1 counter on it, and it doesn't matter because it's never going to die. It's an artifact. Yeah. So, very cool. Yeah. So, besides that, we have our Delny to double up our Timna triggers, double up our Derevi triggers, double pretty much all the triggers in here, really, which is just really powerful overall. Also can help with your Emil going infinite. And we're on the Culling Ritual, which will give us a bunch of mana, so we can maybe pump that into Thrasios or do whatever we want with it. We're on this Reanimate to just grab the best thing out of any graveyard. And overall, fairly standard. We're on a Tail's End, which is kind of interesting. You don't really see this card too much, but countering a triggered or activated ability is just good overall. We're on the Veil of Summer, and just a very reasonable interaction suite here. Yeah, and we're on the One Ring, and we're on quite a few value enchantments. Also, the Swift free configuration will go infinite with Devoted Druid, because it's not a creature anymore. You can make infinite green mana, and you can just pump that all in Thrasios to win the game. Training Grounds, again, is going to synergize really well with Thrasios, and then we're on the other standard enchantments. Alright, next up, we are finally at my deck. And this is my Blue Farm. I have been working on it and improving it for about a year. These are just my choices, but they are fairly standard. I wouldn't say I'm doing anything that's too crazy, too out of the world. Notably, I am not on any wheels, just because I didn't really like those play patterns. But yeah, overall, fairly standard list. I don't think there's too much to say or anything here that would really shock anybody. I am on the Necropotence now, and I'm on the Touch the Spirit Realm to deal with those pesky abolishers and things of that nature. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you guys later.